What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And I'm Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive. And we are in the midst of starting a brand new series, or I guess we just started a brand new series this past Sunday called Reset. And it's kind of about resetting our priorities, resetting our lives, kind of a real hard reset to start fresh and anew this year. Is that right?
You're kind of taking advantage of the time of year it is, which is school starting back yet. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So speaking of things getting reset and restarted, today was the first day of school as we are recording this.
As we're recording, it's the first day of school. And I know at least a couple of us staff members kind of have a little bit of the sads, but also excitements. It's just kind of a weird rotation as I know Nicole and myself, we have
Jessica.
Middle schoolers starting, and then, Jessica will have an elementary school, but those kids starting elementary school, it's all new,
Preschool's over there getting ready to have their open house. So,
all these kids, a lot of them, and lots of prayers for the teachers. We had a great celebration this past Sunday for them and the blessing of our backpacks, and great turnout. But also just if you weren't there, we're praying for you. We're praying for your kids. We're praying for their teachers, just that this is a great school year that has a lot of opportunity and a lot of growth ahead for sure.
Yeah.
And you got a new car this weekend.
I did.
It's nice. It's got the new car smell. I can appreciate that.
We just went to lunch in it. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, we did. That was a big event for me. But the other big event would be that my wife did not start back school.
Yeah, retired. How's she feeling?
Oh, she feels fantastic.
Okay, no sads at all. It's happy to be retired.
Yeah, she's gonna volunteer at the school and do some reading and some other stuff. Do stuff with our ministry.
Awesome.
Very
cool. Well, Dave, you started this series called Reset. Why don't you break it down a little bit for us, and we'll deep dive into it.
Well, a lot of it's taking advantage of the time of year that it is, because it is kind of a reset moment for us. But I think my point with this particular reset moment is it feels a little different. It feels, first of all, that we need a good reset, but it feels like that maybe we're finally kind of beyond COVID, and so it's really kind of time to really get some things normalized, and so to take a look at all of that and what we need to do, and so the whole metaphor of reset, I think about resetting my modem. You ever have to do that, Nick?
Yeah. Every time you call, they're like, start by turning it off and on. I'm like, I've done that.
Yeah. No, you have to turn it off and unplug everything.
Yeah.
And I actually went online this morning to kind of research why, something about when you do that, it disconnects from the server or something, and so that's how you do a hard reset. But lots of times, it requires that. It requires a hard reset to get things up and get connected again. And of course, as human beings, we need to be connected with God. We need to be connected to our faith. But we're running around, and we're not like electronics where we stop working. We still are kind of frittering about, but not thriving. And so the hope of this, for all of us, as a reminder to me too, is that sometimes we need to reset, have a hard reset in our lives, to reprioritize, how our lives of faith go. It needs to be centered on that. If it's not centered on that, it's centered on something else that's not going to bring us a good life. And so as a basic text, I'm looking at Haggai. It's a prophet. It's a very short little book right towards the end of the Old Testament. I think it's the third to the last book in the Old Testament. And there's a great story in there about a community of faith that needed to reset, the Jewish people. And just to give the context of what had happened, it was at a period of time where they were just over what we call the Babylonian captivity. Mm-hmm. Babylon Empire was surging at that point. Of course, they had come to Israel, to Jerusalem, and completely destroyed the temple, ransacked everything, and then they didn't take everybody like back in when the Jewish people were in Egypt, but they took all the leaders, they took all the artisans, they took all the people of influence, and they took them to Babylon. And there they were as refugees, living there in exile for a number of years. And it was a very difficult, dark time. And they missed, because unlike us, where I think we can practice our faith in many places, the temple was the center of their worship, and of course, the temple was first destroyed, and then they were away from their homeland. And so, finally, another empire came on the scene, the Persian Empire with King Cyrus. And so when King Cyrus defeated the Babylonians, he said to those living in exile, "You can go home now. Go home." And not only that, he did this crazy good thing. He gave them the money that it would take for them to rebuild the kingdom. Not the kingdom, to rebuild they needed to rebuild the
temple,
kingdom, but rebuild the temple.
Right.
And so they got home, and 17 years passed, and they still hadn't rebuilt the temple.
They just sat on all that money for 17 years?
They could, apparently they could not. It was just kind of a political thing. Actually, the verse, I actually wrote it down. The people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. And so I'm not sure of all the politics that was in there, but they hadn't done it. But they had rebuilt every other part of their lives.
Yeah.
And so they were not thriving as a community. And Haggai comes on the scene and sees all this, and he comes in with sort of the prophetic warning about that to remind them that it was time to rebuild the temple. And so we'll see over the next couple of weeks as we progress through the story how that came to be and what happened then. But that's where it started for us, because we're kind of a year or so back post-quarantine where life is supposed to be getting back to normal, but yet for a lot of people, I'm hearing this and I've experienced it some of myself, things don't really seem to be clicking, and so maybe it's time to reconsider what have we lost maybe from before, and how can we reset to get to that. But anyway, looking at this sort of putting off maybe resetting our lives with God, people would maybe were able to travel again, or were able to do some things with family again, get together for reunions and things that they hadn't done and really missed, and all very good things. But one of the last places where it seems that people have been reconnecting has been with church and with their own personal discipleship and with the community that comes there. Churches all over America, we certainly see it here, are averaging about half in worship what they were before. Now we have great streaming and a lot of people watch online, but still there's something that's not quite right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it just, and it's not even really totally numbers related. It just kind of feels like, a lot of the preconceived notions of how you did church or whatever, like a lot of that has kind of had this kind of reset button because, before, I think we've talked about it, that a normal attending person, you would say, oh, they're going to be there at least three weeks out of the month. Even some of that has changed where some people it's like, maybe it's more like 1 to 2, that they could still be considered regular attenders. But I think in terms of numbers, it doesn't, I think around here, we haven't quite gotten back. I think we're over half at this point, halfway back. But I know some people at other churches, even some much bigger, or at least used to be much bigger, that are struggling to get back 50%.
I hear it everywhere. And so I do think it has to the fact, people can travel again, they can do these things again.
Right.
A lot of good reasons, but also I think maybe our priorities sort of drifted in there. And so, the whole thing here is just sort of this, hey, let's reset. And so the people there living in Jerusalem who had not rebuilt the temple and who had this excuse, well, the time has not yet come. It reminded me of something that someone gave me one time who has a connection to this church, Claude Smithmeyer. He's now passed away.
I love Claude.
Yeah. Claude, it affected everybody he met.
Yeah.
And so I knew him as another pastor in the conference. And as I said, I think in the service, I actually had the honor of singing with hers and Andoni and Tom Elliott at his funeral. We sang there, and just loved him. But he had this way of this thing of giving people little tangible items to remind them of things, whether it was a cross or
Did you ever get a rock?
I never got a rock. What I got was a little round coin-looking thing. It's made out of wood, but it said "to it" on it, T-U-I-T, to it. It was a round to it.
Yep.
And, he used that in witnessing to people and talking to people and things that maybe, goals that we had made, dreams we had made, and even things like accepting Christ in our life, something we're going to get around to it. And so the people there in Jerusalem had this big round to it. They were going to get around to rebuilding the temple, but they kept putting it off, and then it had been 17 years. Yeah. And think about that. I mean, how old are your kids?
I have an 11 and a 9-year-old.
Okay, so imagine not having this memory. I mean, there was 17 years. That's almost another generation that has no collective memory of temple worship and having the temple, and they had the resources to do it. Right. They just hadn't taken the effort to do it. And part of what Haggai's pretty hard on them is they put other things besides God, besides their worship ahead of that. And one of the points that I made in the sermon has to do with cultural Christianity. Yeah. Because I think all those people would say they were good Jews, just like maybe some of us who may have maybe drifted would say we're good Christians. We have all the talk and all the trappings and maybe even the intent, but the practice of that has become much more influenced by the cultural with what we have prioritized. We're doing what everybody else is doing instead of putting God first and allowing our lives to sort of stream and flow out of that.
Yeah, I think our church probably has fell victim to this, but I know it seems like we look around and we go, what is everybody else doing that's successful? That's what we have to do, as opposed to leaning into maybe our strengths and our gifts as a staff, as a church, as a leadership. And it's really hard not to, you know, I mean, we have been trained since we were kids, Mm-hmm. I mean, do you remember going to school and you'd be seeing somebody or everybody started wearing, in my day, like it was Tommy Hilfiger shirts. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have any Tommy Hilfiger shirts, but the next time we went to the store, what did I want? Mm-hmm. I wanted this Tommy Hilfiger shirt, so it's kind of something that's ingrained in us, but at the same time, it's not really all that we need. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there certainly is that keeping up with the Joneses. That's part of like, this is what people are doing now. And so we need to be doing those kinds of things too, as far as, status symbols or whatever. And even travel can be a part of that, taking trips and those kind of things. And as I say, there's nothing inherently wrong about it.
Right.
It's just that what order have we put things in? But I also see sort of the cultural Christianity come into that we act just like the world in the way that we relate to people, or the way, our conversations, the way that we may tend to look at people in a divisive way. They're either with us or with, not looking at people as children of God, but like whether they're in or out as far as being our enemy, maybe based on our political party or something else, usually that. It's a lot less civil than it once was. So we've been deeply affected by the culture, and I think part of that is because we've left. We have not had the priority of being Christ-like, and had that our aim at developing the characteristics of Christ. We've had the name of Christ in calling ourselves Christian, but we haven't really kind of pursued the goal of making ourselves more Christ-like.
Now you kind of started this with kind of this. We've come out of COVID. Do you think COVID had or that time of COVID where we weren't in church as much, or maybe we got out of the habit of church? Do you think that kind of ties into this? I mean, not to say that this wasn't going on before COVID. I mean, I think we've always struggled with a little bit of this cultural Christianity of how to relate, because we also are what's attractive, what's, you know what I mean? But do you think it kind of maybe amplified it a bit?
I think it certainly did. And I will say this, I'm really kind of tired of blaming COVID for everything.
Sure.
But I think what that did was sped up some things that were already happening.
Yeah.
We were kind of falling towards a reset anyway. And so it created this crisis, which brought us to a point. And that's one of the things that's important when you see church history, and every time there's been kind of a renewal and revival, it usually comes after some sort of crisis. that sort of gets everybody's attention. And so, not to always be blaming and talking about COVID.
Sure.
But COVID has just come to represent a whole lot more than just a global pandemic.
Yeah.
It's just this moment in time where things kind of changed.
Well, I think we're sifting away from the virus that was COVID or the pandemic part of it, but now we're kind of focusing on like, what were some of the repercussions that maybe we didn't even really see happening at the time? Do you know what I mean? It's not that people were away. It's that maybe we got into new habits as a community, because all of a sudden we had so much more time to figure out what to do with, because we're working from home now. We're not attending Sunday churches or Wednesday. It's almost like do you remember going from like high school to college and that first year of college feeling like you had so much more time because you got to kind of choose what you did with your time? You kind of set your schedule and you were in class for a little while, but all of a sudden, like the rest of your day kind of opened up because you weren't in school for 7 or 8 hours. You were there for 3 or 4 more focused hours a day. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of my freshman year.
Been a while, huh?
But I mean, no, but I do get, well, and there are other reasons too.
Yeah.
But I do get that, the sense of responsibility. If we had something, we had one kind of schedule that was set, and suddenly that got disrupted, and then how we reorganized our time in that. I think that's a really good case. I think something else that was happening before, because attendance in church and a lot of things, we've been, I think, over years, over, decades maybe, lowering the bar and lowering the bar and lowering the bar with what the expectation of what it meant to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, And probably some of the things that we kind of changed needed to stop and be changed. But but I think, even now we kind of compromise with saying, well, we have all this online attendance or whatever you might call it. We've sort of lowered the bar of, I think, commitment to the church and focusing on our mission together and our outreach to the world, but also our mission in making disciples of Jesus Christ. And so, that's all represented in this as the temple. And, not that God just resides in one place, but that's the way the Jewish faith was set up at that time. Sure. The temple was the center of their faith world.
Right.
And so they put it off for 17 years. They have not raised their kids in that. And Haggai comes on the scene and says, look, whatever it is that's been filling your life, whatever priorities you have, and we can tell a lot about a person's priorities, I think, by looking at 2 things: their wallet and their calendar.
Okay.
How you're spending your money
and
what you're spending your time on kind of tells us what our priorities in life are and should be. And so, so we're at this reset moment, and it feels good and purposeful to be thinking about and talking about that now, because I think this is a time that we can do something about it. I'm hoping that we're getting back into a new normal and really be able to configure how can we be truly dedicated to being Christ followers now. Yeah.
And I don't want to, and maybe this is a spoiler, I'm not sure fully where you're going with the series overall, but let's say that we are kind of like this hypothetical place of like, we need to rebuild this space in our life of this center for Jesus to be kind of that center, that priority, that piece. How do we maybe start sifting through that rubble that has been there for maybe a few years or a couple of years at this point, or maybe even, for some people it might be 20 or 30 years who might be watching. You know what I mean? Like, how do we start sifting through that rubble to make sense of it all? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think it is. I talked about lowering the bar. I think we need to, in 2022, what does it look like to be a faithful follower of Jesus Christ? And it may how we organize our life and our time may look different than what you were doing in the 60s and 70s when there was no internet, when communications were different,
Right.
when our society was different. And so to go back and say we're going to rebuild things the way they were in the 1980s, I think is an exercise in futility. But how do we build it? How does it look really? What does it look like? What does it mean to be the church right now?
Yeah.
And I think some intentionality needs to be that. And it's not making it, I think, necessarily easier for people because we've done enough of that. But it does need to take into consideration that we're making the best use of our time and our resources.
Right.
And using those faithfully to serve God.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's fairly close.
I don't think I answered your question.
No, it was pretty close because
Yeah.
I mean, really, I was saying like if we want to really take this seriously and say that we're resetting our lives, I think you even had a quote that was talking about if the spiritual life is not at our center, then something else will be.
Right.
So like how do we make sure that our spiritual life is that? You know what I mean? And that might be different for everybody. So I think it's a little bit of our own work,
I don't want to give away one of my key illustrations for this coming Sunday, but I'll go ahead and use it because I think it does apply here, and we can start thinking about it. But I've been riding my bike here lately. I'm getting a little bit too old to run and bikes like that. So I've been thinking about my bike, and on a bike you've got the center of the wheel, your hub, and then you've got spokes that come out for it. And I think what had happened in our lives, something else, maybe we didn't even know what was at the center.
Yeah.
But it hadn't been it hadn't been our life of faith. It hadn't been the church. It hadn't been pursuing a life of being a disciple. That had just been one of the spokes. And so it's not just a spoke. Our church life, our faith life is not just one another's spokes. It should be the center. When we do that, all the spokes as they come out is going to make us to be able to, I think, flow and make progress the way in which we have. Does that make sense? I hope it does because I'm using it Sunday.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense actually, for sure.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, as we consider God kind of at the center, I think some things that we can maybe start with are just really get back to even just the basics, finding that time of reading and finding that time of prayer. I might be a little embarrassed to admit this, but I don't pray over my kids enough, and I yesterday, as we were getting ready for school, as I could sense a little nerves, I said, you know what? I'm going to pray for my kids. And I got down and I just said, can I pray with you? And my wife, Rachel, she was telling me that our oldest, like she kind of peeked out and said that she had the biggest smile on her face, but to me, that was more of a sense of like, let's rededicate that the beginning of everything flows through and from Christ, and yeah, it's okay to be nervous. Yeah, it's okay to be stressed, and yeah, it's okay to deal with whatever comes in life. The spokes parts, right? Or that's the part. But it all filters back to a center where if you're good with God, the rest will kind of work itself. We as Christians or we as Americans, we have a tendency to put a lot of different things in that center spot.
Right.
So it's kind of a battle sometimes.
Yeah. Haggai said, I love what he talks about. You've come back, you've rebuilt your life.
Yeah.
But you eat food, but you're never filled. You drink, but you're never satisfied. You plant, but you never harvest. Then he says, it's like you have a purse with a hole in it. And so, when you think about our money, we want to take care of our money, but like if you're walking around and you've got your money and everything's kind of falling out, and, to think about that in a spiritual sense, when we put something else there, whatever we were trying to attain and make ourselves feel good by these food, drink, clothes, whatever, it does have a hole in it. To have the satisfaction in life and the fulfillment in life, it does require Christ at the center. And and we'll build on those spokes. We got 5 weeks to talk about this. This is the first week. And we'll talk about, I'm sure, and go deep on some of the specifics. But I do think the things that we think of like prayer, Bible study, worship, and corporate things. I mean, not just corporate worship or Bible study. There's a lot of things that we might have done back in COVID. We might have learned that we could do things by ourselves or just in a small contained space looking at our device. But there's something about being connected with other people and being a community where we understand that we have to relate with one another and love one another and forgive one another and compromise and speak our minds, and hold each one another accountable. All of those things can't happen by yourself alone in your room.
Yeah.
That has to be done in community. And I'm not sure, how that might look different than it did back in 1980 and 1990 and those years there. But there's part of that's never going to go away. I think there's something that in kind of, in the incarnation, God became flesh, so that he could, relate more to us. And relating in the flesh, face to face one another, I don't think anything will ever replace that.
And as Methodists, that is something John Wesley was very passionate about, were these little groups of people to do life together. And, so that's in our history.
Yeah, exactly.
As a church.
Yeah, right. Everybody being in the societies, but even in the way that we're organized, we're organized in conferences, and we use conferences. We're going to go out and we're going to learn. Here's some motivational speaker at some conference.
Yeah.
But conferencing there, the way Wesley meant it was that we do things in community. We make decisions in community and in conferencing, and it's hard work getting around that. And instead of falling into sort of the divisive sort of grouping of people, rather a bunch of different people coming together, looking at the same thing and reaching some decisions together. Not everybody is going to be 100% maybe satisfied with that, but that's just, I think, the way the church works. That's how we learn to give and take and put relationships above always having to be right.
Yeah. And I think with that being said, we recognize the value of online streaming.
Yeah, we're doing it right now.
But we also recognize the importance of in-person community.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage anybody who's watching to find a place to connect, whether it's you're coming to church on Sunday mornings or whether you're involved in a grow group, or even if you're just going to lunch with a mentor, with a friend, somebody you can talk to. The Christian life's not meant to be a solo act.
Right. And I do think that's one place where we can make some adjustments because, I've had some, I'm in a group every Tuesday morning. It's a Zoom thing. I'm very close to those people and we're interacting. It's different than passively watching something, watching a TV show or even watching a worship service, is because we are active together. So, when I say in person, it's connecting with another human being, and Correct. It can be done now with communications and things we have in different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
And just having those things in your world will really help kind of give us a good foundation to reset off of, to put that in place where that might be something we missed. Mm-hmm. But if we can start in that space and some of the basics, I really think we could get a good reset off to get things really firing back on all cylinders per se.
Absolutely.
To get the internet back up and running.
Yeah. Yeah, to make to be connected.
That's right.
To get a hard reset so that it's all connected, and so we'll work on that some more.
That's right.
In the next few weeks, and this has been fun to talk about today. And we're just beginning this conversation. We got 4 more of these to do. I do want to say, looking ahead in a couple of weeks, and we don't have the details. We may have a little meeting here in a second to get some more of those details. But we're going to try another live deep dive with Nick and Dave here in a couple of weeks, and so we may do it at a different time of day. We're looking at that to maybe do something more in person. So
If you have a recommendation or an idea of when we should start, you think it might be best, let us know, because we're discerning that. We recognize that we've been doing this a while now, and our schedules have meshed pretty well to this point. And now, as vacations are coming and kids stuff's happening, and I ask you guys to pray. My mother could potentially be having a lung transplant, so there might need to be some ebbs and flows and stuff like that. But we're trying to figure out creative and fun ways to still be connected, so that we can still dive deep into what's being talked about. And
Right, for sure.
For sure. Well, we've already kind of had a preview with the wheel and the spokes.
Yeah.
So I think we can kind of skip through that part. But guys, we're so grateful.
I will say next week I'm going to bring out five key things. I think is the 5 spokes on that wheel.
Okay.
With Christ at the center. So that's kind of the outline, and we'll fill it in next week.
It'll be fun. But continue to be connected with us. Let us know what you're thinking. The avenues. It's deepdive@hickoryflat.org. You shoot us an email, drop it in the comments. We check those out pretty regularly. And if there's nothing else, you got anything to say, Dave?
I'm great.
All right.
Good.
You guys have a good one. We'll catch you later.
Thanks. Bless.